Thanks to David Webb. Any final words?
Well, I can't be here tomorrow. I wish you'd have me back. So I want everyone to remember June 6th. Longest day, a very important day in world history, 2 days away.
All right.
That's it.
Good to know. Hopefully we'll get some sunshine on that day.
That would
We've had
be
too
nice.
much rain.
That
Send the rain to the west.
Kennedy, you've been in rare form. Last word?
Last word, give you a tip. Never pet a burning dog.
Oh!
Here's Harris.
Fox News alert, President Trump reacting to a leaked memo that appears to outline some of his legal team's plans in the Russia investigation. This is Outnumbered Overtime. I'm Harris Faulkner. Fox News has obtained that letter that the president's legal team sent to Robert Mueller in January, outlining the reasons the president should not sit down for an interview with Mueller. They say all the documents they provided should answer any questions the special counsel may have, and they contend the presidents cannot obstruct justice because they have unfettered authority over all federal investigations. Not just this president, all presidents, they say. That letter also argues Mr. Trump has the power to pardon himself if he wants to do that. Here's what the president tweeted in response. As has been stated by numerous legal scholars, I have the absolute right to pardon myself. But why would I do that when I have done nothing wrong? In the meantime, the never-ending witch hunt led by 13 very angry and conflicted Democrats and others continues into the midterms, exclamation point. But the reaction from the president's critics and Democrats has been fierce. Senator Ed Markey says the president is just plain wrong.
It's not a rule of Trump. It's a rule of law that we live under in the United States of America. Even back in 1974, Richard Nixon's Justice Department made it quite clear that Nixon could not pardon himself. The same thing is true here.
Chief White House correspondent John Roberts with more now from the North Lawn. John?
Harris, good afternoon to you. The president certainly thinks that he is right on the law. All of this became an issue over the weekend after Fox News and the New York Times obtained this 20-page letter that was written by the president's outside legal counsel at the time, Jay Sekulow, who's still with him, and John Dowd. It's dated January 29th, 2018. The specific passage here that has raised a lot of eyebrows is he could, this is the president they're talking about, he could, if he wished, terminate the inquiry or even exercise his power to pardon if he so desired. The president, as you saw there with Senator Markey, getting some pushback on all of this from a number of people who say that he doesn't have the power to pardon. Adam Schiff, the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, sort of echoed what Senator Markey said, tweeting, quote, President Nixon asked the Department of Justice if he could pardon himself. They said no, as no one may be the judge in their own case. He resigned 3 days later. In case you want to follow the Nixon model, that would be Thursday of this week. Either way, if the president does or doesn't have the power to pardon himself, and he believes he does, Rudy Giuliani says to do that would be a bad idea.
Almost impractical. You know, the guy, the president of the United States, pardoning himself would just be unthinkable, and it would lead to probably an immediate impeachment. You know, you get the House, Senate would be under tremendous pressure. President Trump has no need to do that. He didn't do anything wrong.
The letter also reveals that President Trump did have a hand in crafting the initial response that was issued by Donald Trump Jr. on that meeting of June 6th or June 9th, 2016, with that Russian attorney Natalia Veselnitskaya. Jay Sekulow and John Dowd writing in this letter, quote, you have received all of the notes, communications, and testimony indicating that the president dictated a short but accurate response to the New York Times article on behalf of his son, Donald Trump Jr. Now, the president's legal team had earlier said that the president had no hand in writing that, so this would seem to be in contradiction to that. The letter argues, though, that the statement was simply a matter between the president and the New York Times. It was a private matter, and therefore the special counsel does not have any right to ask anything about it. The letter saying, quote, the president is not required to answer to the office of the special counsel or anyone else for his private affairs with his children. The team also contends that all of the information surrounding that meeting has since come out, so what else does Robert Mueller really need to know about it? And in terms of an interview, Rudy Giuliani said over the weekend, because this 20-page letter, by the way, was arguing all about the reasons to not do an interview with Robert Mueller. I was told by a source that the legal team wanted to get him thinking, wanted to make the argument. It would be a high bar he would have to leap to get an interview with the president. But Rudy Giuliani saying over the weekend, while they're still thinking about it, they are leaning against it. So we'll see where that goes. Harris?
John, you've given us a full report. I just have one quick follow, and it's about the leak. The president may be pointing the finger toward Robert Mueller or his team. If it were to be some sort of outside the circle leak, what kind of punishment would come with that, if any?
Oh, nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing. It's a confidential letter. It's not like it's top secret or classified material. It's a letter that the president's attorneys wrote to Robert Mueller.
All right. John Roberts, thank you very much. My first guest, Republican Congressman Andy Biggs of Arizona, sits on the House Judiciary Committee and is also a member of the conservative House Freedom Caucus. Great to see you today. Thanks for being here.
Good to be with you.
So you saw with this letter, the question is, can any president, obstruct justice?
Well, I think that was what they claimed in the Nixon case, but in this particular instance, if you look at 18 U.S.C. 1501 to 1510, you're not going to find anything here that's obstructing justice because none of the predicate elements of the offense are even met. So I think that Robert Mueller and his team and those who are claiming that are premature. And certainly, I suppose that a president may obstruct justice if he's acting corruptly, taking bribes to do something like that. But short of that, then it's really hard for me to imagine that the chief of the executive branch is capable of obstructing justice.
Congressman Biggs, what do you make of just the details in the letter as the predicate for not sitting down? What's your opinion?
Well, I agree with them. I think it'd be disastrous to sit down because it's an attempt to kind of entrap the president. And I think what Jay Sekulow said in the letter was it shows a couple things. Number one, that the president's been extremely cooperative, not only providing a mountain of documents, but even on occasion waiving privilege that he could otherwise claim. And so I don't think that there's any rationale to sit down, and nor is there a rationale to subpoena the president to sit down.
And what do you make of this notion of the president being able to pardon himself? Everything from what I've read and legal experts I've talked with have said, well, yes, the president could do that.
Yeah, I think it's premature because there's no crime. I mean, you have to have a crime before you can pardon yourself, number one. But number two,
charges of some kind.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't have that. The second thing is, if you look at it, there's no constitutional constraint on the power to pardon of the president. And so I think that there's a constitutional authority for the president to pardon himself. I think it'd be highly unlikely, and in this case, certainly unnecessary.
Well, you heard Rudy Giuliani say it could lead to impeachment. I mean, politically, it could be very explosive.
Oh, yeah. I think he's right. I think politically, this would be lighting a powder keg for sure.
So what does the president do in your estimation going forward? You've got this letter that's leaked. It seems to have a lot of details on his behalf of why you wouldn't sit down with the special counsel. What's next, do you think?
Well, I think Robert Mueller and his team are so entrenched. They've spent so much money. They've got to produce a result of some kind. But there's nothing there. Otherwise, we would have heard about it. And so I think they're going to keep pushing, and I think it's Congress's duty to intercede. And I think, quite frankly, it's Jeff Sessions' obligation to make sure that this investigation gets pulled, it gets shut down, and that's what needs to happen.
Well, real quickly, here's the president saying that it was Mueller's team who leaked the letter. Can we pop that up? There was no collusion with Russia, except by the Democrats. When will this very expensive witch hunt hoax ever end? So bad for our country. Is the special counsel Justice Department leaking my lawyer's letters to the fake news media? Should be looking at Dems corruption instead. Congressman?
Well, if it turns out the Mueller team is leaking, there's very little we could do, but we have to point out that it's a continued bias on the part of the team. I want to get to the bottom of that and find out who leaked that letter.
All right. Congressman Biggs, great to see you. The great state of Arizona. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Harris.
Let's get some reaction now from the other side of the political aisle. Democratic Congressman Dave Cicilline of Rhode Island, who also sits on the House Judiciary Committee, so I would imagine you men probably know each other, and is co-chair of the Democrats Policy and Communications Committee. Good to see you. Good to see you. Some of the criticism for Democrats, just to put it out there, is that you guys have kind of been dripping with thirst for there to be some sort of charge of something to see in Mueller's investigation. You, like everybody else, has no idea what's in there, but so far, no evidence of any collusion. And what say you?
Well, I think, first of all, Democrats are not thirsting for that. What we have been very focused on is an economic agenda that addresses the economic anxiety of the American people. With respect to the investigation, what we've said is, let Mr. Mueller complete his work. We have tried in every way to protect the integrity of the investigation. There has been tremendous efforts to interfere and try to impede it, both by the president and his team. The American people are entitled to know the truth. Let the investigation continue. Mr. Mueller should be protected so he can finish his job and tell us, where the facts lead us and report to the Congress and to the American people what's there. But I think, we are very frustrated because while all this attention is being focused on this, we're not doing an infrastructure bill. We're not addressing the high cost of college. We're not addressing the high cost of prescription drugs. There's a lot we could be doing, but we have a White House that is, consumed with an investigation, with conflicts of interest.
Wait. You're saying
scandals.
The White House is consumed with this investigation? The president put out how many millions of dollars there have been spent, and there's no evidence of collusion.
Well, you say there's no evidence of collusion. We don't know that. We don't know everything Mr. Mueller owes. We know for sure. No, you don't know what the investigation has produced because it hasn't been presented to the public.
Fair.
What we do know for sure is the Trump organization met with the Russians who said they had dirt on his opponent, and then the president dictated a letter that lied about that meeting and tried to give it another explanation. There is ample evidence that there was collusion between the campaign and the Russians. What we don't know
actually,
is
if that were the case, we'd be hearing that at this point. What you're listing are some things that have come.
Harris, the investigation is not done. And all I'm saying is let the investigation be completed. Mr. Mueller, his investigation is filled with professionals who are doing their job. We ought to let them do it. And people ought to stop trying to stop the investigation.
But you accuse the White House of being focused on the investigation. I would say that everybody on the Hill has been focused. You can multitask and still get infrastructure done. You can multitask and still be part of the North Korea and the healthcare discussion.
The president's not. But the president's not, Harris. That's the point. The president is so distracted with the chaos.
That's not true. He had top Korean officials, North Korean officials at the White House on Friday.
Look at the president's Twitter. Look at the president's Twitter. All these documents.
Okay, so you're trying to tell me that you want to hold the entire White House and administration according to
Harris,
a couple hundred characters on Twitter.
You know what my constituents are concerned about? What are we doing to raise family incomes?
These are all great questions. Where are you guys at the table for health care?
We have all of these proposals.
Where are you at the table for illegal immigration?
We have a Democratic, very bold economic agenda that talks about reducing the cost of prescription drugs, making child care more affordable, raising family incomes, making sure people have the skills necessary for the jobs.
I'm just saying that why can't you all do both?
Instead, you cover all the stuff about the Russia investigation. The Democrats are saying, we want the investigation to be completed. Let the professionals who are doing this. This is a serious investigation. The Russians interfere with our democracy. They attacked it, and they're going to do it again. That ought to be a concern to everyone, Republican, and Democrat, and independent alike.
Well, people on both sides of the aisle, with due respect, are concerned about that. And when you talk about whether or not you can get these other things done,
we have a president and a Republican Congress that is focused on undermining the Department of Justice, undermining the professionals who are doing this work, attacking the FBI, attacking the Department of Justice.
There's a long line of actual
the rule of law in
evidence
this country
of some bias at the FBI among a small number of employees. It's not widespread. You and I are not saying dissimilar
we'll
things.
Say that.
You're just out shouting me, and that doesn't count.
No, I'm not shouting you. What I'm saying to you is, look, we want the investigation to be completed. I think everyone does. But we ought to have a president that stops trying to impede it, interfere with it, undermine it. Let the work
What do you make of the leaks on this? The leaks on this and previous ones, too, out of the House intel, where the fingers seem to be pointing at Democrats. Look, we can go around and around in circles on this, but we're saying similar things about all the other things that need to be focused on.
I mean,
so when the president calls Democrats obstructionists and expects some of you to come to the table, what do you say to the president?
We're at the table. We're not in charge. We have ideas on how to reduce the cost of health care. We have specific bills to reduce the cost of child care, to reduce the cost of prescription drugs. We can't get a vote on any of these. We're not in charge. When we get become in charge in November, we'll be able to move forward on all this. Right now, the Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the presidency.
No.
So
We know how the
Democrats aren't
elections turned out.
obstructing.
But I will
They
say
have
this,
the power to bring any of those bills to the
something
floor.
positive in this conversation, if I can. The Senate Dems today, who sent a letter to the president with their deal terms for North Korea. Again, not too dissimilar to what people on the other side of the political aisle, not too dissimilar to what some of the expectations should be. And if there's one place where you all ought to be able to get together as the American public watches, they might hope it would be North Korea and moving ahead. It didn't happen with Iran. We pulled out of that deal. So I want to give the last word to you just in terms of this sort of togetherness spirit, because it is going to take that, no matter how much you shout.
Yeah, no, I hope the North Korea summit is a success. I think there's a lot of reasons to be skeptical. We've seen the North Koreans on 2 prior occasions lure the U.S. into negotiations, and while they were getting concessions, they were continuing with their program. I think the president has to do a lot of analysis and study and understand the history of the North Koreans, what their objectives are. I think he's now basically said this is a meet and greet without an expectation it's going to produce very much. But I've said from the very beginning, there's not a military solution. It requires diplomacy. I hope I'm wrong and he's going to be successful. It's hard to imagine that it will, because the president hasn't put together a real strategy, hasn't studied it so carefully, sort of shoots from the hip. But I hope it's a success. I think everyone should want this to be successful, and we denuclearize the Korean Peninsula.
Whew, we ended that on integrity, I might add. Congressman Cecily, thank you very much, and we'll bring you back.
Thanks for having me.
The White House is touting President Trump's 500th day in the Oval Office with a 500 Days of American Greatness media campaign. Is the president getting his fair due? We'll debate it. Plus, a major Supreme Court ruling coming down on the side of a Colorado baker who refused to bake a wedding cake for a same-sex couple. Some critics are calling this a victory for personal freedom. Others are saying it's much more limited than that in scope and will have no effects on anything going forward. That's ahead.
The emotional toll on my family and just my life in general has been pretty dramatic, just for trying to live according to my faith.
Fox News alert, the Supreme Court has ruled in favor of a Christian baker who refused to bake a cake to celebrate the marriage of a same-sex couple because of religious objections. The justices faulted the Colorado Civil Rights Commission handling of the claims against Jack Phillips, saying that it showed a hostility to religious freedom. But the court is not deciding the bigger issue in the case about whether a business can actually refuse to serve gay and lesbian people or any people. Immediately after the decision, the larger national legal organization of the LGBTQ community weighed in. Lambda tweeted this 7-2 ruling, while limited, invites discrimination and further efforts to justify withholding service from #LGBTQ people. This will encourage all sorts of mischief by well-funded anti-LGBT organizations who want to create exceptions to non-discrimination laws. Senior political correspondent Mike Emanuel is live at the Supreme Court. Mike, what's the latest on this?
Well, Harris, good afternoon to you. Experts say that the Supreme Court really did sidestep some of the bigger issues here. Attorney General Jeff Sessions praised the High Court moments ago, saying, quote, the Supreme Court rightly concluded that the Colorado Civil Rights Commission failed to show tolerance and respect for Mr. Phillips' religious beliefs. In this case and others, the Department of Justice will continue to vigorously defend the free speech and religious freedom, First Amendment rights of all Americans. The justices hammered a state entity for basically treating this Colorado baker unfairly. Justice Anthony Kennedy writing, quote, whatever the confluence of speech and free exercise principles might be in some cases, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission's consideration of this case was inconsistent with the state's obligation of religious neutrality. An attorney who argued this case on behalf of the Colorado baker sounded pleased.
The other applications of this principle will have to wait other cases, and we'll see how the votes go on those cases. But Jack Phillips serves everyone. He just wasn't willing to do all messages based on his faith, and the court honored his tolerant views with protecting his religious freedom.
What's striking in this case is it was not a 5-4 decision. 7 justices voted in favor. Kennedy, Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch, Roberts, and liberals Breyer and Kagan. I asked the legal director for the Human Rights Campaign about it being a 7-2 ruling, and she notes the justices did not tackle the broader issues.
Given the very narrow nature of this decision and the fact that it does not set precedents, that is to say it does not affect the outcome of future cases, it's less surprising by the 7-2 nature of the decision.
Experts say this is not the end of the fight over the big picture issues, but it is certainly a very happy day for this Colorado baker and his supporters. Harris?
Mike, thank you very much. Let's bring in my next guest, Stephen Mulroy, a former federal prosecutor and University of Memphis law professor. Great to see you today. I wanted to bring you on the program because of something that you explained that made so much sense, and I don't want people to miss it. This was supposed to be very, very narrow. First of all, tell me about that and whether you think it actually will impact other cases.
Right. Well, as to they're both good questions, Harris. As to the first one, this could have been a very broad holding indeed. It could have said that people with sincere religious objections to anti-gay discrimination laws always were exempt or never were exempt. Or they could have said that people who were engaged in expressive activity like wedding cake decorators and photographers and that kind of thing always had a free speech option to not engage with, same-sex weddings, or never had that kind of option. The court dodged all those questions and just said, on these particular facts here in Colorado, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission acted in such a way that seemed to telegraph a lack of respect for the sincere religious views of this one baker. So in this one case, we're not going to go, we're going to go for the baker and not for the Colorado Civil Rights Commission. Now, as to your second question, what, if anything, does this tell us about future cases? And I would say not a lot. I mean, I think it does suggest that other civil rights commissions and other states going forward should watch what they say and make sure that they are respectful towards people. But other than that, I don't really know what lesson we learned from this case.
That's so interesting. You talk about it as lack of respect. I'm reading in some places today it might even be seen as bias. What were some of the things
the court suggested?
Well, what were some of the things that this commission was saying to this baker that was seen as disrespectful or in some cases bias?
Right. Well, not all of the commission members.
Okay.
But a couple of the commission members made some comments that the court seized on, like suggesting that there's a long history of intolerance to other groups on the part of religious people, that this was despicable, that they even referenced the Holocaust as an example of religious intolerance leading to discrimination, and that was part of their decision.
While talking to this baker and his representation.
Yes, right, and the court said that, that was going too far. It suggested a lack of neutrality with respect to his sincere religious beliefs. The court also noted that at the time, same-sex marriage was not legal in Colorado, and so perhaps it was more reasonable for the baker to think that he was within his rights to refuse to serve these customers.
Yeah, and moving forward now, things have changed. And what do you think will happen if this comes up again? I mean, again, I understand the narrow scope of it, but where does this case sit in terms of informing the public moving forward?
I think it'll be very difficult for the court to give some sort of blanket exemption to people who have even sincere religious objections, because then, well, what about the person who has sincere religious objections to interfaith marriage or interracial marriage, or thinks that women should stay at home and they shouldn't, they shouldn't have their own jobs? I mean, the parade of horribles, the slippery slope becomes really problematic. I think that going forward, the court will have to craft some rule, but it'll have to be a narrow rule that doesn't open the floodgates and tries to strike some balance between sincere religious convictions, but also what the court acknowledged was Colorado did have the right to add GLBTQ status to its list of non-discrimination categories. The court's, I don't think, going to retreat from that. They're going to have to try to strike some balance, but it'll have to be a narrow one.
Interesting. And meanwhile, 7-2. That is a very broad range, if you will, from what we've seen in the court. And that tells you what, just real quickly?
Well, again, I think the narrowness of the decision explains it. If you read the concurrence by Justice Kagan on behalf of her and Justice Breyer, they were staking out the ability to protect gay rights in future cases, but this doubling down on this particular Colorado Civil Rights Commission didn't go about it in the right way.
Stephen Mulroy, great to have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un is back on, but Defense Secretary Mattis warns there's still a bumpy road ahead. We'll talk with a member of the House Armed Services Committee about that. Stay close. Story developing: the summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, as you know, is back on after the president met with a top North Korean official. That official carried a letter from the nation's dictator to the Oval Office last Friday. But Secretary of Defense James Mattis today has just warned from Singapore, where the planned summit will take place, caution ahead of the big event. Watch.
We can anticipate at best a bumpy road to the negotiation. As defense ministers, we must maintain a strong, collaborative defensive stance so we enable our diplomats to negotiate from a calm position of strength in this critical time.
Meanwhile, Kim Jong-un reportedly has replaced 3 of his top military officials with loyalists ahead of that summit. Greg Palcott live in London with details. Greg?
Harris, that's the big news of today. A pretty significant shakeup in the North Korean military brass just a week or so ahead of that very important summit involving President Trump and Kim Jong-un. The North Korean leader, according to various reports, replacing his defense chief, his chief of general staff of the army, and the director of the army's very powerful political bureau, all with folks more loyal to him, less conservative, and a bit younger, although they're all still in their 60s or so. It is thought that there's been some grumbling in the ranks regarding Kim's commitment to some form of denuclearization. It's also thought that he wants a team that he can trust, a little less liable to stage a coup against him, and even those willing to divert military manpower to economic goals. That is a new aim of the young North Korean leader. Meanwhile, yes, in addition to this, a lot of other activity leading up to next week's summit, following last Friday's meeting between President Trump and the North Korean vice chairman of the Communist Party there, Kim Yong-chol. Diplomatic teams from the U.S. and North Korea have been meeting nonstop Saturday, Sunday, and today along the DMZ. They're trying to thrash out some kind of tangible agenda for next week's summit. Over the weekend, there have been reports about a possible add-on. That is that South Korean President Moon could be flying in for an after-summit meeting with President Trump and North Korean leader to declare at least an unofficial end to the Korean War. There was only a truce in place there for this decades-long conflict. One final note, Harris, Kim Jong-un could be a busy leader in the next couple of months. There are reports over the weekend of a possible meeting in the coming months with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and also even Russian President Putin. Busy times. Back to you.
Always busy. Greg Palcott, you're on it. Thank you very much. Republican Congressman Jim Banks of the great state of Indiana is a member of the House Armed Services Committee and joining me now. Thanks for being here.
Good to be with you, Harris.
Let's start with the 3 people at the top in North Korea that were just replaced for loyalists. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's a good sign. At the end of the day, if the reports are true, it's another sign that Kim Jong-un is serious about moving towards some conclusion through these discussions with President Trump that would lead to the beginning of the denuclearization of North Korea. So while I'm always skeptical, while I remain cautious about where all of this leads, I still do see room to be hopeful that a positive conclusion can be reached in the near future.
So when you say positive that these 3 have been removed, I mean, were these 3 particular people on our radar for any particular reason, or does it just show that movement's coming and he wants his closest people to him?
Well, it's another example, Harris, that Kim Jong-un is showing some signs. Again, I'm always skeptical, but these are signs, if the reports are true, that these 3 military leaders were more conservative than he was and did represent a faction within his cabinet of advisors who were against the talks with President Trump. I'd say this is a good sign, but we should always remain cautious about everything and skeptical of everything that we hear and learn from Kim Jong-un and his regime in North Korea.
I don't know if you can see, but I think you can hear. We're going to listen something together. Former Homeland Security Advisor Tom Bossert to the president had this to say, that the president really has nothing to lose. Let's watch and listen.
don't believe that this is really a situation where the president has anything to lose. And so I think he's doing the right thing. President Clinton tried a bilateral approach. President Bush tried a multilateral approach. President Obama tried indirect engagement. And so what President Trump is doing is kind of just right.
Congressman Banks, your reaction.
I fully agree. You go back to the last 4 presidential administrations before President Trump, and we saw the same thing over and over again. Meanwhile, North Korea and the regime there continuing to build their nuclear program. President Trump deserves so much credit. Go back 1 year ago from today, I was a brand new member of Congress, and almost on a weekly basis, we were learning more and more about additional capabilities that North Korea was growing in their intercontinental ballistic missile program. The very fact that we are where we are today, we're just days away from a potential summit between Kim Jong-un and President Trump, says a lot about what this administration has done to bring talks that might lead to the denuclearization of North Korea, and I largely applaud that.
As Secretary Mattis, Defense talked about there being bumps on the road. What do you anticipate?
Well, there might very well be. I would never hardly second guess anything that Secretary Mattis says, but in this case, look at where we've been, look at where we are today. I imagine there will be a lot more twists and curves in these negotiations and talks as we move forward. Successful diplomacy always has those types of twists and turns. So I imagine we'll see more of that, but the very fact that we are where we are today says a lot about the strength that this American president and this administration has shown with the help of Congress, by the way. I'm very proud that Congress has reversed the drastic cuts to our military that we had under the Obama administration and begun a military buildup that puts President Trump in the best position to show American strength with a powerful military rather than negotiate from a position of weakness that we saw with so many administrations before.
Well, I don't know if you caught it, but our correspondent just reported that there's an after-summit meeting perhaps planned with South Korea's leader. Real quickly, that has to be a sign of a whole lot of optimism that this summit is June 12th.
It's right around the corner, and a number of world leaders are paying attention. It can only be a positive sign that something good might come out of this. I don't expect for there to be a full conclusion on the 12th, but moving forward, we do expect that this could lead to a good, positive outcome down the road, a verifiable denuclearization of North Korea and their program down the road, and President Trump deserves all of the credit.
Congressman Banks, thank you very much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
A day filled with midterm primaries tomorrow, almost like a little Super Tuesday. It could make or break a blue wave for Democrats, but many Democrats in California are now worried about races that once looked like a sure bet. What could be the blame for the change? Tomorrow will be the closest we get to Super Tuesday in a non-presidential election year when voters head to the polls for primaries in 8 states. A lot of eyes on California and what's being called some quirky little electoral rules, which Democrats worry could cost them the control of the House. A reported softening of support for Democrats among suburban voters could also make things difficult for the left. Jim Brulte is the California GOP chair. Great to have you on the program today, sir. Tell me what exactly these electoral rules are and how they could hurt Democrats.
Well, we have what's called a jungle primary. Voters of any political party can vote for a candidate of any political party. So we could have 2 Republican candidates run off for governor, secretary of state, Congress, Senate, Assembly. We could have 2 Republicans or 2 Democrats. And so it's no longer checkers, it's 4 or 5 dimensional chess. And the strategies out here are something to behold.
So how do you get ready for something like that? Because usually a party might have a similar platform for some. Although on the Democratic side, you're seeing such a push to the left with Elizabeth Warren winning her nomination to run again in the Senate just this weekend. But then the more moderate Democrats, too. So how do you square a platform?
Well, you know, we have our platform, but one size doesn't fit all. You know, there are Republicans they don't agree on absolutely everything, just like Democrats don't agree on absolutely everything. Our role as the party you know, we're like an iceberg. Most of what we do is underwater. It's our job to make phone calls, walk precincts, raise money, help candidates with data. But the candidates have to go out and deliver a message based on their point of view. And our candidates are doing that very well.
As a political party, though, with your fundraising ends, how do you choose who to give money to in this sense, since everybody can vote for anybody?
Well, we tend not to give a lot of money in primaries. We tend to marshal our money for general elections. Our budget's about $25 million over 2 years, and we're waiting to see what comes out of this primary. We're very excited, though. You know, there was a lot of enthusiasm for Democrat candidates, particularly at the congressional level right after the presidential election. That gave hope to Democrats and gave us a great deal of concern. But that enthusiasm gap has shrunk, and Republicans are going to do very, very well. In fact, we're overperforming in the number of votes that have already been cast through absentee ballots. Republicans are about 6% above our registration in what's already been turned in. So we're very excited to see what's going to happen tomorrow.
Chairman Brulte, can you tell me why it is you think that Democrats particularly are vulnerable right now? I mean, I know you talk about the gap kind of shortening between you two, but what's happening?
Well, first of all, they were very enthusiastic, and Republicans basically didn't kick in until about 7 weeks ago when the campaigns really started. Second of all, the Democrats have really postured and positioned themselves on the far left. You know, the leading candidate for governor in California, Gavin Newsom, wants a single-payer health care system. By the way, that costs $400 billion a year in California, and our entire state budget's only $199 billion. Most of the candidates for Congress are trying to be part of the Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders wing of the Democrat Party, and that's just not where most California voters are.
Chairman of the GOP Party, California, ahead of what's kind of like a mini Super Tuesday tomorrow. Thank you for helping break it down today.
Thank you, Harris.
President Trump is marking his 500th day in office today as the White House has launched a media campaign touting his achievements. Can the president claim some big victories and get credit for them? Will this campaign help the GOP ahead of the midterm elections? You just heard the chair of the GOP party in California. They think they're doing well. Power Panel Net.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dana Perino. We are awaiting Sarah Sanders to take the podium on a busy news day. A lot of questions about whether the president can pardon himself after he tweeted as much. The Supreme Court weighs in on the baker who turned away a same-sex couple, and Bill Clinton very combative when a reporter asked him about Monica Lewinsky. We'll discuss all that and more on the Daily Briefing.
The president is marking 500 days in office as the White House kicks off 500 Days of American Greatness media campaign, highlighting what it sees as achievements. The president outlining some of that in this tweet. This is my 500th day in office, and we have accomplished a lot. Many believe more than any president in his first 500 days. Massive tax and regulation cuts, military and vets, lower crime, illegal immigration, stronger borders, judgeships, best economy and jobs ever, and much more. Bringing in now David Bernstein, progressive commentator, Noel Nikpour, Republican strategist. Noel, I will start with you in the list.
It's fantastic. And that brings me to a point, what the Democrats actually have to run on. What is their message coming, in these midterms? Because if we have success from everything from job growth, you have success with the marketplace, you have record highs, you have consumer spending through the roof, consumer confidence is great. So if you have so many things going, you have global relations that, while a lot of people have been very nervous about it, we are getting a lot of bad actors to come to the table with things that they've needed to, like artificial intelligence and so forth. So the question of it is, a lot of people are saying, this blue wave is going to be coming. Well, the blue wave is going to have a lot of difficulty getting over a red wall, because I think that with everything that President Trump has been doing, he can take not only credit for it, but it is forming a huge red wall that this blue wave is not going to be able to penetrate.
Did you just make that up?
Well, well, it's a red wall.
Having lived in surfer country, you know how that works. David?
Well, look, I mean, I think by some measures, the president has had a lot of accomplishments. I just think there are accomplishments on a lot of fronts that happen to be very divisive. He has made a lot of progress on his argument on immigration, but it's an argument that obviously people across this country do not necessarily broadly agree with. The idea, for instance, separating children from their families.
Look, let me stop you right there. Those pictures were from 2014, and a lot of that existed under President Obama. Children in cages. I'm just spitting the facts here. Feel free to pick back up now that the facts are on the table.
We know that this president has done a few things that, President Obama, for instance, wanted to do. He got a Supreme Court justice confirmed. Well, President Obama would have confirmed a Supreme Court justice if Mitch McConnell had let him have a hearing for a Supreme Court opening he was duly able to have. So I think it depends on your perspective about what the accomplishments are. We do know that the tax cuts are benefiting in the short term. We also know that economists are saying that those tax cuts may, when they run out in 2020,
have you heard what the president wants to do? He wants to revisit that issue to see if he can stop the sunsetting, I believe is the term.
But we don't.
Look, I hear what you're saying. Not everybody may agree that it's all feel good, but some of the facts that get spit from the left actually are
let me actually make a broader point, which is that 500 in today's world, looking at people's progress at these kind of arbitrary markers like 500 days, when the kind of problems that we're looking at actually trying to solve are much bigger and more complex, the kind of comprehensive issues, it's really easy to pass executive orders.
We always look at these benchmarks. I mean, you have to have a measurement of progress in some sense. Like with Congress, if you don't set a date, do they do anything?
That's right. And you know what? When you talk about progress, aren't getting Americans back to work, isn't that progress enough? Isn't that one of the biggest things?
We've been on a steady...
Look at the markets. The markets are reacting with consumer confidence, which means consumers have jobs and they're spending.
Look, if you want to, there's a long debate that we can have about whether or not presidents deserve credit for economies. The Republicans have said they didn't give President Obama
credit. Wait a minute. You can't blame a president for giving tax cuts to corporations to bring their money back, to bring some of that, right? Okay, and then create jobs. Jobs that I will give you this, do require more skills perhaps than our worker base is yet to catch up to. But those jobs are waiting for them.
But the repatriation is a great example. This was something that President Trump talked about incessantly on the campaign.
So how can you blame him but not give him credit?
No, because he at the end of it, he did a head fake on it, right? He brought a little bit of that back.
We even have Democrats like Tim Cook.
I got to bring you back. Thank you. We'll be right back.